Kofi had never known a life without luxury. From the moment he could remember, his world was a place where wealth and opulence were constant. His father, Chief Kwame, was a well-known businessman, commanding vast holdings in the diamond and gold mining sectors, and his mother, Nana Hama, was a renowned philanthropist who ran multiple schools and health centers across the region. Together, they were an unstoppable force in their community, not just because of their wealth, but because of the power, influence, and respect they commanded. Kofi, their only child, was the jewel of their lives. He lived in a grand mansion perched on a hill overlooking the city below. The mansion itself was a testament to the family's wealth, with its polished marble floors, golden chandeliers, and wide hallways that seemed to stretch endlessly. The windows offered a breathtaking view of the sprawling gardens outside, and the air always smelled of fresh flowers, perfectly tended to by a team of gardeners. From a young age, Kofi had been taught to expect the best, and that's exactly what he got. His clothes were hand-tailored by the best designers, and his personal chauffeur, a man named Tunde, drove him to school every morning in a sleek black limousine. At school, Kofi was untouchable. The other students treated him with a mix of awe and envy. His father's name carried weight, and his mother's charitable work made her a figure of admiration. Kofi was popular, not for his personal qualities, but for what his parents had built. Every day, Kofi's schedule was meticulously planned. Breakfast was a gourmet affair prepared by the family's private chef, Ayodele, who would make freshly baked croissants, eggs cooked to perfection, and tropical fruits from the family's own orchards. By the time Kofi finished his meal, his school uniform would be perfectly pressed, and his personal driver, Tunde, would be waiting to take him to school. Kofi's friends marveled at his life. They asked him about the private jets his family used for vacationing in exotic locations and the extravagant parties they held. "You should come with me to Paris for the summer," Kofi boasted one day to a group of his classmates. "I am getting a new phone for my birthday too. It's the latest model, you know, the one everyone is talking about." He was always surrounded by the best gadgets, the finest clothes, the latest trends. Yet, despite the attention, despite the praise, a strange emptiness began to settle within Kofi's heart. He felt like a spectator in his own life, as if his world was a stage and the applause he received was for a performance that wasn't even his own. The wealth, the attention, it all felt shallow. Kofi began to wonder what life would have been like if he didn't have everything handed to him. What if he didn't have the luxury of an endless supply of money, servants at his beck and call, or the constant stream of admiration? He began to ask himself, what would I be if I didn't have my parents' wealth? The question troubled him, and for the first time in his life, Kofi found himself feeling lost in a sea of riches. One afternoon, during a break at school, Kofi was sitting on a bench under a tree when he saw someone who caught his eye, Kwabena. Kwabena was the complete opposite of Kofi. While Kofi arrived at school in a shiny black car, Kwabena rode a bicycle with worn tires. While Kofi wore designer clothes, Kwabena's uniform often looked a little frayed, and his shoes, though polished, were clearly not new. Yet, despite these outward signs of poverty, there was something about Kwabena that drew Kofi in. He was always calm, composed, and walked with a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from within. Kwabena wasn't flashy, but he was the best student in class. Kofi couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Kwabena aced every test, excelled in every subject, and participated in extracurricular activities. He was the star of the debate club, the captain of the football team, and an exceptional musician. He was well liked by both teachers and students, but not because of any external factors. It was his character, his intelligence, and his humility that made him stand out. Kofi observed him closely. During lunch, Kwabena would sit with a small group of students, quietly talking about books, sports, and the community outreach programs he was involved in, unlike Kofi, who was used to people being enamored with his wealth. Kwabena didn't need anyone's admiration. He was content with himself, and that, more than anything, left a lasting impression on Kofi. One day, as the bell rang for a brief break, Kofi found himself walking up to Kwabena. He had to know more. "Kwabena, can I ask you something?" he began, his voice a little hesitant. Kwabena looked up, his calm gaze meeting Kofi's with a quiet smile. "Of course, Kofi, what's on your mind?" Kofi shifted uncomfortably. "How do you do it? I mean, how do you manage to be so successful at everything? You don't have all the things I have. I have everything handed to me. Yet I feel like I'm missing something. I want to be great like you." Kwabena chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It's not about what you have, Kofi. It's about what you do with what you have. You don't need to be born with a silver spoon to be great. The most important thing is to focus on your heart, your mind, and your will. With those, you can go anywhere. I don't have fancy things, but I use the tools I have wisely, and that's what makes me successful." Kofi was taken aback. He had always thought that success came from what you owned, what you could show off. But here was someone who had little and yet had so much more in terms of inner strength and character. Kofi felt a wave of both admiration and shame. "I've never thought of it that way," he admitted, looking down at the grass beneath his feet. Kwabena smiled again, his voice kind. "It's not about comparing yourself to others, Kofi. It's about understanding who you are, what you value, and using your time wisely." That moment left Kofi deep in thought. He had always equated his worth with what he could show, the cars, the clothes, the vacations, but Kwabena had shown him a different way of thinking. For the first time in his life, Kofi felt like he had been given an opportunity to break free from the shallow expectations that had defined him for so long. He had always been told that success came from wealth, but Kwabena's words opened up a new world of possibilities for Kofi. Could he be successful on his own terms? Could he create something lasting that wasn't tied to his family's name or fortune? The seed of a new ambition was planted in Kofi's heart. He wanted to be known for his own achievements, not for the wealth he was born into. But how could he do that? How could he stand out when the world seemed to constantly remind him of his privilege? Kofi knew that the answer lay in pushing himself, doing things he hadn't done before, stepping outside the comfort of his family's world, and in his search for challenges, he would soon find himself making decisions that would change the course of his life. As Kofi sat in his room that night, looking out over the city below, the thoughts that had been growing in him for weeks suddenly became clear. He was ready for something more. He wanted to prove that he could accomplish something on his own, not just ride the wave of his family's wealth, but he was unsure how to do so. At school the next day, he began talking to some of the older students. They were different from his usual crowd. They were daring, confident, and always talking about the latest things that made them stand out. One of them, a boy named Titi, spoke with a kind of audacity that Kofi hadn't had before. Titi told him about a secret society within the school. a group that didn't play by the rules, a brotherhood that offered respect, power, and influence. "You are looking for a challenge, right?" Titi asked, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "We can give you that. All you need to do is prove that you are serious. It's not about what you know, it's about what you are willing to do to succeed." The promise of power and recognition tugged at Kofi's heart. For the first time, he felt like he had the chance to truly prove himself, not as the son of Chief Kwame, but as Kofi, the individual. Kofi's curiosity quickly turned into an overwhelming desire for belonging, and soon he found himself spending more and more time with Titi and the older students. The secret society, which went by the name The Circle, promised power, respect, and freedom from the shackles of his parents' wealth. Titi's words echoed in Kofi's mind. "It's not about what you know, it's about what you are willing to do to succeed." The initiation process was brutal. It wasn't about being the best in class, having the most money, or even simply showing up. It was about proving your loyalty to the circle through acts that challenged your morality and pushed you to do things you never imagined. The group was about forging strength, but not in the way Kofi had expected. He was told to meet in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The large, cold building was covered with graffiti and smelt of mildew. When Kofi arrived, he was greeted by the members of the circle, several older boys, each wearing dark clothing and speaking in low, serious tones. There were no smiles there, no warmth, just cold eyes, waiting to see if he was ready to prove himself. The leader of the circle, a tall boy named Bawa, stepped forward. He looked at Kofi with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "So, you are the rich boy who thinks he can walk in and join us, who? We will see about that." Kofi felt a surge of nervousness, but he quickly pushed it down. He was determined to prove that he wasn't just some spoiled rich kid. This was his chance to show that he could achieve something on his own. Bawa led him into the center of the warehouse, where the rest of the members were gathered. "We are going to give you 3 assignments, Kofi. Pass them and you will earn your place among us. Fail and you'll be out. Got it?" Kofi nodded. "Got it." Bawa smiled cruelly. "Good, the first test begins tonight." The first task Kofi was given was to steal an expensive artifact from a local museum. The item was a rare gold statue from an ancient civilization worth millions, and it was part of a traveling exhibition in the city. To the circle, this was a test of his courage and his ability to break the law without fear. Kofi had never stolen anything in his life, but the weight of the circle's expectations hung heavy on his shoulders. That night, he and 2 other members of the group, Titi and another boy named Kofi, who went by the nickname Snake, snuck into the museum. Under the cover of darkness, they wore black clothing and balaclavas to conceal their identities. Titi was the one who led them through the museum security systems, using a combination of hacking skills and physical manipulation of the alarm system to disable the cameras. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest as they crept through the darkened halls. They reached the room where the golden statue was displayed under a protective glass case. Snake immediately went to work on the lock while Kofi stood guard, his nerves running wild. "Do it fast," Titi whispered urgently, glancing around nervously. Kofi tried to focus. He wasn't sure why, but something about this felt wrong. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick with tension. The sound of Snake's lockpicks scraping against the lock echoed in the silence. Finally, the lock clicked open. Snake lifted the case with ease, and Titi took the gold statue in his hands. "Good job," Titi whispered, but just as they turned to leave, they heard the sound of footsteps. "Someone is coming," Kofi hissed, panic rising in his throat. They scrambled, rushing through the dark corridors, trying to avoid the approaching security guard. Kofi's breath came in ragged gasps as they made their way to the back door. Just as they were about to escape, Snake tripped over a pile of broken glass, his foot catching awkwardly. "Move!" Titi shouted. Kofi pulled Snake up, but it was too late. The security guard had spotted them, and the alarm blared through the museum. The trio ran, the sound of their footfalls echoing through the night as they made it to the alley where a getaway car was waiting. They barely made it, with the statue clutched tightly in Titi's hands. Kofi's heart was still racing when they got into the car. "We made it!" Snake grinned, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous excitement. "That's the first step, Kofi. You are one of us now." Kofi didn't feel proud. He felt nauseous. The adrenaline was still high, but the realization of what he had just done, stealing a priceless artifact, gnawed at him. He had just broken the law, committed a crime. It wasn't just a theft. It felt like something deeper, something that was eating away at his conscience. The second assignment was far darker. Bawa had informed Kofi that this task would test his ability to manipulate and control others. Kofi was told to use his influence as the son of a wealthy businessman to blackmail a prominent teacher at his school, Mr. Dapper, into changing grades for a student who was indebted to the circle. Kofi was given a file with information about Mr. Dapper's personal life. It contained details about an affair he had with a younger woman, and the group had managed to obtain explicit photographs of the two together. Kofi was told to approach Mr. Dapper with the evidence and demand that he change the grades of one of their members, or else the affair would be exposed. At first, Kofi hesitated. The idea of blackmailing anyone, especially a teacher, was abhorrent to him, but the circle was watching, and Kofi knew that failing this test would mean losing his place among them. They would destroy him if he backed out. The next day, after school, Kofi called Mr. Dapper to a secluded spot in the school grounds. He held the envelope containing the photographs, his hands trembling slightly. When Mr. Dapper arrived, Kofi was surprised to see how vulnerable the teacher looked, nervous, afraid even. "What is this, Kofi?" Mr. Dapper asked, his voice faltering when he saw the envelope. "What do you want from me?" Kofi swallowed hard, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "I need you to change the grades for one of my friends. You know who. If you don't, I will send this to your wife, to the entire school." Mr. Dapper went pale, his eyes darting nervously as he glanced around. He was a man caught between his dignity and his fear. "Please, Kofi, you don't have to do this. I have worked hard for years to build my reputation." But Kofi wasn't listening. The words, "I will ruin you," felt almost good to say. He had power now, power over someone else. He could force this man to do his bidding, to bend to his will. "You will do it," Kofi said firmly, handing the envelope over, "or I will make sure everyone knows about your affair." The teacher's face crumpled with defeat. "Fine," he whispered. "Defeated, I will change the grades." As Kofi walked away from the confrontation, his stomach churned. For the first time, he didn't feel powerful. He felt disgusted. He had manipulated a man, used his personal feelings to control him. This wasn't who he wanted to be, but the group had made it clear. There was no turning back now. The final task Kofi was given would push him into the depths of violence. The circle had a rival group, and it was time to send a message. Kofi was told to help carry out an attack on a member of the rival group. The plan was simple: ambush the person, intimidate them, and make them understand that the circle ruled the streets. Kofi had never been involved in physical violence before, but the idea of being seen as weak, of losing his standing in the circle, drove him to act. He was handed a metal pipe, a blunt weapon, and told to swing it at the rival gang member, a young boy named Amechi, who had been dealing drugs in their territory. Kofi's heart was pounding as he followed the group to the alley where they had arranged to meet the boy. Amechi was standing alone, waiting, unaware of the trap set for him. As soon as he saw Kofi and the others approaching, his eyes widened with fear. He backed away slowly, but it was too late. The circle had him surrounded. Kofi was handed the pipe. "This is how you prove yourself," Bawa whispered. "Strike him. Show him who is in charge." Kofi looked at Amechi, his hands shaking. The boy was just like him, scared, vulnerable, but the group wasn't going to let him off the hook. The atmosphere was tense, charged with violence, and before Kofi could think, the pipe swung forward. After that night in the alley, Kofi's mind was in turmoil. The swing of the pipe, the sound of it connecting with the flesh of Amechi echoed in his mind. The weight of the moment was suffocating, and as he looked at the broken boy on the ground, a sense of dread settled over him. He had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. There was no going back, no undoing the damage. But Kofi couldn't bear the thought of continuing down this path. The circle was ruthless, and the assignments were becoming increasingly violent, increasingly dangerous. Something had shifted in him during that last task, a realization that he didn't belong here, that he was not the person he thought he was becoming. That night, he couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, replaying everything in his head. By morning, he had made up his mind. He couldn't live like this anymore. He snuck out of his house early without telling anyone and made his way to the warehouse where the cult held their meetings. The familiar grim faces of the circle members were there, waiting for him, expecting him to complete the final step of his initiation. Bawa, the leader, looked at him with a cold smirk. "You think you can just walk away after everything you've done?" Bawa's voice was low, dangerous. Kofi didn't say a word. He turned and walked out of the warehouse without looking back, the anger and disappointment in Bawa's eyes following him like a shadow. As Kofi stepped into the daylight, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He was free for now, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. The circle wasn't a group that let anyone go without consequences. The next day at school, Kofi felt a tight knot in his stomach. He walked through the corridors with his usual air of confidence, but something felt off. As he was heading to class, two of the circle's members, Kofi, known as Snake, and another boy named Owusu, cornered him in a secluded part of the schoolyard. "You think you can just leave the circle like that?" Snake growled, stepping in front of Kofi. Kofi's heart raced. He hadn't expected them to confront him so soon. "I'm done with all of this. I don't want to be a part of it anymore." Owusu, with his cold eyes and hard face, laughed menacingly. "You don't get to leave, Kofi. You have one choice now. Finish the initiation, or we'll make sure everyone knows you betrayed us. No one crosses the circle." Kofi swallowed hard. The weight of their words felt heavy, and he realized just how much danger he was in. They were threatening to ruin him, to expose him as a coward, a traitor. He stood there in silence, unsure of what to say, knowing that any word he spoke could only make matters worse. Snake leaned in closer, his voice low and menacing. "Don't even think about running. If you try to leave, we will make sure your family pays the price too." Kofi's mind raced as he walked away from the encounter. He knew he couldn't do this alone. The guilt, the fear, and the pressure were becoming too much for him to bear. That evening, Kofi came home late, feeling a sense of unease hanging over him. The stress of the previous day was taking its toll. He had begun to change. His friends noticed it, and so did his parents. One evening at dinner, Nana, Ama, and Chief Kwame exchanged a concerned look as they watched their son pick at his food, his eyes distant. It wasn't like Kofi to be so withdrawn. He had always been talkative, full of life, and eager to share his day, but tonight he barely said a word. His mind was clearly somewhere else. Kofi, his mother began gently. Is everything all right? You are not yourself lately. Kofi just nodded, his face expressionless. He didn't want to tell them the truth, but they could tell something was wrong. Second distance came when Kofi's father, Chief Kwame, noticed that Kofi was taking longer than usual to finish his schoolwork. He had always been an exceptional student, but lately his grades were slipping and he seemed distracted. The pride and joy that Kofi had once taken in academic excellence were fading. When his father tried to help him with his homework, Kofi had snapped, something he had never done before. I don't need your help, Dad, Kofi shouted, his voice full of frustration. Just leave me alone. The third instance happened a few days later. Kofi, usually an energetic boy who enjoyed playing soccer and running, began to withdraw from his hobbies. He spent long hours in his room, away from his friends and his usual activities. The boy who once enjoyed life was now distant, almost lifeless. These changes did not go unnoticed by his parents. They had watched Kofi grow from a confident, happy child into someone who seemed to be battling a storm of emotions he couldn't control. They knew something had to be wrong. After a particularly unsettling argument one evening, Nana Hama sat down with Kofi in his room. She was gentle, patient, and loving. Kofi, my son, you are scaring us. Please talk to us. We know something is happening. We won't judge you, but you need to let us in. Kofi's face crumpled. The walls he had built around himself began to crack. With a heavy sigh, he finally spoke. I've been part of something. A secret group. They are pressuring me to do things I don't want to do. I'm scared, Mom. I don't know how to get out. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked at his mother. I have done things I'm ashamed of. I don't know who I am anymore. Nana Hama hugged him tightly, her heart breaking for her son. We will help you, Kofi. We will help you get out of this. We will get through this together. Chief Kwame and Nana Hama were not people to back down when it came to their child. They immediately took action. The first thing they did was contact Kofi's school, arranging a meeting with the principal. They explained Kofi's situation without revealing too much, knowing that there were dangers involved. They also sought legal counsel, knowing that if things escalated, they would need to protect their son. At the school meeting, the principal, a kind woman named Mrs. Ayu, listened carefully to their concerns. We've seen a change in Kofi, she said. He's been more withdrawn, more aggressive in class. We've also had rumors about a group he might be involved in. I will work with you, Mr. and Mrs. Ashanti, to ensure that we can protect him and help him out of this situation. The couple also hired a private investigator to track down the circle, and soon they had gathered enough information to know who was behind the group and what their intentions were. However, as word of Kofi's defection spread, the circle was not about to let him go easily. The very next day, Kofi was threatened again, but this time it was more direct. As he walked home from school, he noticed a few members of the circle lurking in the shadows, waiting for him. They blocked his path, their eyes cold and unforgiving. We told you to finish the initiation, Kofi. Bawa's voice cut through the air like a knife. If you don't come back to the circle, we will make sure you regret it. Your family won't be safe either. Kofi's heart raced. He knew these people weren't bluffing. They were capable of violence, and they wouldn't hesitate to act if he didn't comply. But before they could do anything, Chief Kwame's black SUV pulled up. Two of his bodyguards stepped out, and the atmosphere immediately shifted. Bawa and the others hesitated for a moment, then backed off, clearly intimidated by the presence of Kofi's father and the security detail. Kofi's father stepped out of the car, his voice stern but calm. "You will leave my son alone or you will regret it. He's not part of your group anymore. If you harm him, you will deal with the full weight of the law. Do you understand?" Bawa glared at them, but without a word, he and the others retreated into the shadows, knowing they couldn't take on Kofi's family. Chief Kwame and Nana Hama wasted no time in using their wealth and influence to ensure Kofi's safety. They employed top security to protect their son and used their legal team to press charges against the circle for their illegal activities. They also worked with the police to ensure that the cult members were held accountable for their crimes. Kofi's parents also took steps to redirect his desire for a challenge into more positive pursuits. They enrolled him in leadership programs, sports, and mentorship opportunities where he could build his self-esteem without the need for violence or illegal actions. They pushed him to excel in ways that were healthy and productive, showing him that real strength came from within. They became more watchful of him, yes, but not in a controlling way. They allowed Kofi make decisions for himself, trusting him to find his path again, but always offering support and guidance. They were no longer just the wealthy, distant parents. They were active in his life, ensuring he had the tools to grow and find his place in the world. As the months passed, Kofi became a different person. His self-worth was no longer tied to the wealth of his family, nor to the force power of the circle. He began to thrive in healthy environments, and his relationships with his parents grew stronger. The pain of his past still lingered, but with their love and support, Kofi was finally able to heal. And so, Kofi found peace, not in power, not in wealth, but in himself.